Hi quilters, welcome to the 14th video in our series of projects to use leftover 2.5-inch strips or jelly rolls. We call this pattern the Porch Quilt. It's a quilt as you go project, finishing at 40 inches by 48 inches. For this project, you will need 24 2.5-inch strips by width of fabric, 1 3/8 yard of a backing, 1 3/8 yard of batting, and 3/8 yard for binding. I'll show it to you in two colorways, one made from my scraps and one made from a kit we have here at the store. Start by layering your batting and backing together using a basting spray according to the manufacturer's directions. I'm going to use a fusible polyester batting, and so I'm just going to fuse it to the wrong side of my backing. I trimmed my batting to be the same size as my backing. It was just a little bit wider, but they need to be the same size. Now I'm going to fold it in half. I should have selvages on opposite sides and press a crease from selvage to selvage. Or you can use a ruler and a chalk pencil or marking pen to draw a straight line across the middle of the batting from selvage to selvage. I have picked out some brown and cream strips to make my quilt top with. I'm starting with 2 of my 2.5-inch strips, putting them right sides together, and then I'm going to lay them right next to that drawn line. I'm going to pin through all the layers to keep them in place. I picked out my backing fabric first and then pulled all the strips that matched the color scheme on the back for the front. Our pattern company, Peachtree Patterns, first came out with this pattern in 1998, and we make it every so often in a new color combination. We've made it with baby fabrics, pinks, purples, reds, any kind of color combination you can think of. I've made this project in many different color combinations: baby prints, florals, brights, homespuns, batiks. Sometimes I mix them all together. You can use jelly rolls, or you can cut your own strips, or just go through your strip bucket and use leftovers from other projects. I'm putting the pins in about every 4 to 6 inches, and once you're done pinning, it'll be time to sew. You're going to use 1/4 inch seam allowances. When I get to the end, if there's any fabric that hangs off the edge past the selvage, I usually trim that off so it doesn't get in my way later. Now you're going to just sew 1/4 inch seam through all of the layers using a walking foot. A walking foot pulls the top and bottom layers of fabric through the machine at the same rate. So it's very important to use a walking foot for this. It'll prevent puckers and ripples. Most machines nowadays come with a walking foot. If you don't have a walking foot, go to a dealer that services your kind of machine and ask to purchase one. The first time I bought a walking foot for my machine, it was a really spendy foot for my machine, but it was one of the feet I used the most often and worth every single penny. To make it easier to fit under the machine, you're going to want to roll up one side of it so it'll fit in that opening. I've got a lot of room on the left side of my sewing machine, so I don't need to roll up both sides, but if you need to conserve space, you can roll up both sides so it's a little bit easier to control and run through the machine. I do a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning and end of this seam. Now you're just going to press it open so you can see both of the strips. The beauty of the quilt as you go method is because you have sewn through all the layers. Every time you add strips, you are piecing and quilting the quilt at the same time. Now you need to pin a strip to each side, so each of the original strips will have a new strip pinned to it. Once you have it pinned on to both sides, it's time to head back to the sewing machines to do 2 more seams. Once the center seam, a single seam, is done, you can add new seams in sets of 2. Make sure to remove the pins as you sew so you don't run over them with your sewing machine. You will continue to add strips in both directions using that same method, matching up the raw edges and pinning until all the strips are used. Make sure to press the seams after you add each set of strips to the quilt top. When you need a fast project or a quick gift, This is the pattern you'll want to remember. It looks great on the back of a couch, hanging over a porch rail, or draped over a big chair. It's also the perfect size for a baby quilt. When sewing this project, you will want to use a thread that matches the backing of your quilt top. I'm going to show you one more time how to add strips to each side of the quilt top, just so that I know you've got the process down. It does take a little bit of practice to make sure that you've got all the edges even and everything on the back side lays flat when sewing those new strips on. I was able to get both of the quilt tops that you will see in this video done in one day. It's really fun to watch how the quilt progresses and just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Once you've sewn on the last two strips, you want to press and then sew one more seam on each side, 1/8 inch from the edge. This will make trimming and binding the quilt top a little bit easier. I trimmed off the edges on the two places where I'd sewn the seam first on both edges, so the opposite sides of the quilt top. Once I have the two ends of the quilt trimmed, I'm going to flip it over to the other side so that I can see the selvages. I want to make sure that as I trim these last two edges, I cut the selvages off on both sides. You wouldn't want to see any of that bright white fabric when you're looking at the back side of your quilt. You also want to make sure that you're squaring it up as you go. You don't want any of the edges to appear to be skewed from the front. As I was sewing the quilt top, I didn't bother trimming threads as I went along because I knew at the end I was going to trim off the selvage on each side of the quilt, so all those strings and threads would be cut when I did that. Now this version was made with my leftover scraps from other projects, but on our website we have kits available for the homespun version that you will see at the end of this video, and another homespun version that's done in fall fabrics. We will leave links in the description below for you to find those quilt kits on our website. Once I'm done trimming from the back side, I like to flip it around from the front and make sure that I've caught all the edges and that there's nothing that's going to be missed when I put on the binding. Now that your quilt top is all pieced and quilted, it's time to attach your binding. I sewed my binding to the quilt back and then flip it around to the front and top stitched it in place. If you pick a busy enough backing fabric, you can't even see the stitching. My second sample is going to be a homespun version, and I'm going to have shades of red, white, and blue in it, a little bit of tan, and for the backing I picked this fun print that when it's turned over it'll look like a second quilt on the back side. If keeping track of all those layers and rolling it is a little bit too much to handle sometimes, you can always pin those rolls into place to kind of help keep things under control. And just like the other one, I'm going to start with the one seam in the middle and just keep adding pairs of strips all across the quilt top. When I'm working with homespuns like this, I don't try to line up the lines so that each piece is perfect. I like that the strips are a little bit wonky and not cut right on certain lines. And I know that's going to drive some people crazy, but it's one of the things I love about homespuns, that they're just not perfect. I'm very happy with the fabric that I picked for the backing too, because it totally looks like I have two quilts instead of one. We hope that you enjoyed this great Quilt As You Go project. Here's the same quilt that we did also in homespuns in fall colors. We hope that you will hit the like button, leave a comment for us, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!